Welcome to Module 11. We've come now to the end of our journey through the modules of the Tanakh. And I'm hoping that by this stage what you have a sense of is the complexity of the Old Testament, or the Tanakh as we now have come to understand it. To understand the fact that the Tanakh has been written by many people over a long period of time. It was written at different points. In fact, even the same books might not have been written all at the same time. They may have been written at different times by different people and then even put together by an editor later on and made into the books that we understand today. I'm hoping that that sense of complexity, instead of overwhelming you, has actually made you even more excited by the concept of interpreting Tanakh. And more importantly, actually being able to understand what Tanakh might mean for us today. As we began this journey together in the intensive, the one thing that I wanted to impress upon you was how important it is to understand in Tanakh in order to be able to understand the things of the Newer Testament. And what we see very clearly, very simply within Tanakh is that it's not an easy book to understand. It's not an easy collection of documents to be able to get your head around. And yet, that's why we need the tools that we've hopefully been developing over the last 11 modules. And so this module is really to pull together some of those tools, some of those concepts, some of those ideas, to pull them together so that we can prepare ourselves to look back now over the last 10 modules and then look forward into our continuing reading and interpretation of Tanakh and making that interpretation connect for us today and for our communities. So in this module, what we're going to be looking at are some of those tips and tools. We're going to be looking at some of those concepts about interpretation, and in fact even offer a possible methodology that we can use to look at any passage within Tanakh and apply it to life and connect it in terms of its own framework as well. So come and join with me as we go through this module 11. Cut. When we look at a text, essentially the text is the framework from which we're working. So if we start with a text, there are really two aspects to interpreting a text. The one aspect of interpreting a text is to say, if that's the text, then what does the text mean? What does the text mean? How do we unpack what the text is meant to mean? And so the first aspect of that is finding meaning. The second stream, or the second activity of interpreting a text, is then to say, well, how now do I go from meaning to application? So how do I look at the meaning of a text, but then how do I apply that text into another context or into another environment or framework? It's those two movements which are really the main movements of any process of interpretation. In fact, it's not only the process of interpretation of sacred scripture, but in fact would be the process of interpretation of any scripture, or in fact any literature or any writing. And so some of the tools that we've developed to look after literature or to understand literature, we now also are using within interpreting scripture. And so because of that, we're able to use some of those concepts. Now there's two big words which I want to teach you or want to share with you, which look at each of these two streams. The first word is the one that looks at the concept of meaning, and that's the word exegesis. Exegesis. In your reading and in some of your extra reading that you may be doing for the course, you may have seen this word every now and then, this word exegesis. And what it means is to take the meaning from the text. So actually to look at the text, to unpack it, to use all the tools at our disposal to actually look at that text and to unpack it and unconnect it or disconnect it in some ways, but also to reconnect it within its audience and with writers and so on. It's that process of finding the meaning within the text is the process of exegesis. The second stream, which is the application stream, the word is hermeneutics. hermeneutics. And hermeneutics is then the process of saying that once we found a sense of the meaning of the text, we then can take that meaning and we can apply it into another frame, into another context. It's like saying that we're going to take the rules of one thing or the understanding of one activity and then reconnect it into the rules of another activity or into another framework. It's a very important movement. The problem for so many people is that what we do is that sometimes we look for the application before we have an understanding of the meaning. In other situations, sometimes we have books or commentaries which are very good with exegesis, telling you what it may mean, or telling you what the Greek means, or the different words that are used and phrases and so on, but there's no application. I'm sure many of you have been to sermons where on one hand you may get a verse-by-verse analysis of every single verse in the particular section that's been read, but you walk away feeling somewhat empty. Because for some reason, yes, you know that passage now very well, you know all the background to it, but the question you ask is, well, how does this apply to my life? That's a sermon where there is exegesis, but little hermeneutic. On the other side, sometimes you may go to church and in fact someone takes the Bible and uses it in a cursory way. They read the passage but then carry on preaching about whatever they feel like and only use the Bible in order to maintain their particular perspective of an outward practical outcome. And that's really a sermon where there's much more hermeneutic and really not all that much connection to the original meaning. Sometimes when in fact we look at the meaning of a text, we actually already know what we want to say. We already know what we want the text to say. And so what we do is we read into the text rather than receive from the text. That process of reading into a text we could call eisegesis. Eisegesis. And really this is something which is very tricky. There are many commentators who will say that there is no such thing as exegesis. There's no such thing as exegesis. And the reason why is because it's impossible for us to truly know with any kind of certainty the origins, the sources, even the authorship of most of the Tanakh. Most of the Tanakh are written by a number of different people over a long period of time. And by virtue of that, some commentators will say, well, there's no real way to know. And so therefore, every interpretation of Tanakh is really not going to be exegesis, but eisegesis. I disagree with that, because I believe that it is possible to get a better sense. Yes, we might never have a complete sense or 100% knowledge of all those questions. But I think part of the process of a community of God, part of the process of the community of the scholars, is that we get to a better and better understanding. And that includes information that we've received from some of the other sciences, from archaeology and from psychology and from physics, from chemistry, from anthropology, sociology. All these other sciences, or the so-called social sciences, help to feed into our exegesis. But we do have to guard for eisegesis. The church has been complicit in eisegesis many, many times. In the country where I come from, in South Africa, there, of course, during the apartheid regime, during that regime when the different races were kept separate, generally because of skin color, one of the things that was needed was a biblical justification. And what happened was that, of course, the biblical scholars would then go into the Bible and go and seek out places which they could use to justify a political reality. The political reality was already there, and so they went to the Bible to now try and find a justification for it. When we use the Bible that way, what we're doing is not exegesis, but eisegesis. However, in order for us to truly interpret the Bible, we need to do exegesis. We need to uncover the Bible. We need to uncover that which is within. We need to be able to look through the different layers of meaning and of purpose. And once we've done that, the next stage is then to take what we've learned, the meaning that we've derived, and then apply it into our own context. Just in the same way that exegesis requires a knowledge and an understanding of the culture then, so hermeneutics requires us to have a knowledge of culture and perspective of our community. Something which often we don't have. Because for most of us, we live in our culture unconsciously. We don't think about our culture. Generally, what we think about is just living within it. And so therefore, we need to be aware of our culture and the cultural realities that we have in order to be able to make the links and the bridges between the exegesis and the hermeneutics.